Hey there everyone, how's it going? This is Michael Laplanet from Laplanet Arts to show you a little bit about motion graphics and how to bump up your game using motion blur. So say you've got yourself motion graphics, a little animation that you're proud of. Let's give this a little bit of a play, okay? We'll let that go through the RAM and there you go. So you see the gears turning here. They have a nice speed ramping where they go a little bit faster in the middle and then they slow back down to a stop. Now, this looks somewhat okay. It's a really simple animation, but it could really be a little bit further, and there could be some, it's still not as believable because you can see that the movement doesn't seem as real or organic. So one way you can do that is by adding a motion blur. Now, motion blurs are occurred when something's moving faster than the rate that the frames can be captured in a camera. Now, since you're animating it, it doesn't really work that way. They just move between the frames. So how can you do that? Well, one way to do that is in pixel motion blur. So when you have this down in your composite, go to Effects, click on it first, select it, go to Time, and pixel motion blur. You can see I already added a little bit of one in there, but it looks kind of just like faded frames. That's okay. What you need to do is you need to drag the shutter angle, which kind of increases the amount it looks like it's moving. Add the shutter samples. Let's bring that around 30 or so. See, a little bit higher. Now, it varies depending on how much motion is in there. Right now, these are just gears that are spinning and turning each other. So they move actually really fast in the middle. So you want to make it seem like it is true. Otherwise, you might not need to add so much. But let's bring this down to 34 might be good. Now, let's add the vector detail up a bit. Okay, now that looks good. Now what this does is it makes vector samples and takes it from the frames in between and kind of assesses how much movement has occurred within the last few frames. And then blends the motion accordingly. And it makes a pretty good looking blur. So we can see that at the fastest point right here around the middle, you can see moving. Let's get another frame because that one was an odd frame. You can see how much movement it did. Right in the beginning, it looks pretty good. That looks decent. Right in the middle, you can see that looks a little wonky because the frames are moving so fast that it's creating a inaccurate blur. So that's okay, we can fix that. You just have to tweak it a little bit when it's at its fastest to check and see the best you can do there. Okay, that looks a little better. Let's bring the shutter angle up a little. Okay, increase the shutter samples. One thing you have to keep in mind though is that the more information you need it to render, the more time it's going to take to render this, which is okay if you're doing a 4-second clip. And especially if it's one you're going to use a lot, you're going to want it to look as good as possible. But just remember that it will take a while to render, especially if you want to get a preview of it. See, I'm only rendering right now the previews at 1/4 of the resolution. So go back to the beginning here, go look at some of these samples. I think we're at a place we can work with. So let's go ahead and render that out. So you can see here that this added a bit to the animation. The first one looks a little plain and just has a more amateur feel. It doesn't have as much life to it. Whereas with the motion blur, it adds quite a bit more life to it. And when you're working with motion graphics, you want things to look as appealing as possible. Like say this was a loading animation, loading screen animation. By having this type of animation, it'll make things look a little more visually appealing. Alright guys, I hope that was helpful for you. I plan on doing more of these videos in the near future. And let me know if there's something in particular you'd like to learn in Adobe After Effects. And then I can see if I can make a tutorial for you. Alright guys, it's time for me to sign off. I will see you in the next video.